2024's latest American thriller, last night at Terrace Lane's now streaming, a bowling alley becomes the target of a group of obsessive attackers. Each action they take is dictated by the numbers on their synchronized watches. When the countdown hits a specific number, they execute their deadly program. Bowling alley. Kennedy is playing with her best friend Tess and two boys. As they enjoy their game, Bruce, an employee at the bowling alley, suddenly approaches them. To everyone's surprise, Bruce reveals that he is Kennedy's father. Bruce looked disgusted when he looked at Cody. Just as he was about to give Cody a lecture, the intercom rang. The equipment at Lane 3 malfunctioned, leaving Bruce with no choice but to turn back and head to the alley for repairs. Kennedy, embarrassed by her father's domineering behavior, retreats to the lounge with Tess. Unsure how to face her friends, Tess tries to comfort her, but no one notices the arrival of a group of strangely dressed individuals. After finishing their transaction at the front desk, the strangely dressed group picked a lane and quietly settled in. Meanwhile, Cody and Pete were completely unaware of the danger looming over them. In fact, Cody was still scheming to provoke Bruce, just as Pete prepared to throw his bowling ball. A strange beeping sound echoed through the alley. Cody turned to find a group of masked individuals who had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. The beeping came from the watches strapped to their wrists. As the other patrons looked on in confusion, the masked individuals saw the numbers on their watches and suddenly stood up in unison. Reaching into their bags, they pulled out iron rods and machetes, then began advancing toward the unsuspecting bowlers. A loud whistle sounded, signaling the start of the massacre. Seeing Pete's gruesome death, Cody lost all his earlier bravado. In a panic, he scrambled to hide under a nearby bowling rack. In the main hall, the masked attackers had begun their rampage, slaughtering indiscriminately. Guests who realized what was happening fled in all directions. However, when they reached the exits, they found the doors chained shut. Some courageous patrons tried to fight back but were quickly overpowered, beaten mercilessly by the attackers. In less than 2.5 minutes, the entire bowling alley was filled with corpses. Meanwhile, in the lounge, Kennedy and Tess were chatting, completely unaware of the massacre outside. Kennedy picked up a bowling ball and started teaching Tess how to throw it. Just as the two were laughing and enjoying themselves, a blood-curdling scream from the main hall shattered the moment. Alarmed, Kennedy and Tess left the lounge to investigate. The moment they stepped out, they saw a woman tumbling down the stairs. The horrifying sight left them frozen in fear. Kennedy quickly grabbed Tess and pulled her to hide behind a nearby bowling rack. When the masked attackers momentarily turned away, the two quietly slipped back into the lounge, undetected. Meanwhile, Cody was still trembling under the bowling rack. He wanted to make a run for the opposite lounge, but the leader of the masked attackers stood nearby, scanning the room. As the attackers began clearing the scene, the leader ordered his subordinates to drag all the remaining survivors into the storage room. At that moment, an injured man spotted Cody and begged him for help, but surrounded by masked figures, Cody couldn't do anything. Just then, a passing masked attacker heard a faint noise and turned toward them. Realizing the danger, Cody hastily smeared the injured man's blood on his own face and lay motionless. Pretending to be dead, the unfortunate man was brutally hacked over a dozen times. His body reduced to a bloody pulp. Cody, paralyzed with fear, watched the horrific scene, unable to move. Fortunately, before the attacker noticed him, they were called away by another masked figure. For the moment, Cody narrowly escaped death. Back in the lounge, Kennedy knew they needed help. She quickly dialed the police to call for reinforcements, but as she was reporting their location, she realized in shock that the police officer on the other end of the call was one of the masked attackers outside. Realizing her mistake, Kennedy immediately hung up the phone. She grabbed Tess and led her to the equipment room. Knowing the area wasn't safe, Kennedy told Tess to stay hidden while she sneaked out to the front desk to search for something useful. At the front desk, Kennedy found a walkie-talkie in the hand of a fallen staff member. Just as she was about to leave, a masked attacker spotted her. The attacker swung their blade toward Kennedy, but in the chaos, she grabbed a can of spray from the desk and blinded them. Taking advantage of their confusion, Kennedy leaped over the counter and escaped. Meanwhile, in the employee lounge, Bruce was still unaware of the carnage outside. He was practicing his bowling technique, thinking his poor skills were the reason Kennedy avoided spending time with him. As he prepared to throw the ball again, the walkie-talkie crackled with Kennedy's frantic voice. Hearing Kennedy's call, Bruce looked up at the monitor, and that's when he noticed the violence in the arena. Looking at the well-dressed thugs, Bruce thought of a digital organization. Bruce, a retired cop working at the bowling alley post-retirement, recalled hearing about this group from his former colleagues. The group was known for its obsession with numbers. Whenever specific numbers appeared, its members would execute coordinated missions. This group had once carried out a brutal attack on a bar. By the time the police arrived, the bar was littered with bodies, and the victims' valuable organs and body parts had been harvested. Despite sealing off the entire city during the investigation, the police hadn't managed to apprehend a single member of the group. Realizing the danger, Bruce told Kennedy to find a safe place to hide and assured her he was on his way. Leaving the lounge, Bruce quietly made his way to the front desk. On a nearby table, Bruce spotted a dagger. Just as he reached for it, a masked attacker discovered him. Fortunately, Bruce's quick reflexes allowed him to take the assailant down. Afterward, Bruce found Kennedy. Knowing there was a maintenance tunnel in the equipment room, he told her they could escape through it. Meanwhile, the masked attackers had gathered all the bodies of the slain patrons into the storage room. Their leader stood by, awaiting the next number to appear. At that moment, they discovered Cody among the dead. Panicked and desperate to save himself, Cody revealed that Kennedy and Tess were still alive. He hoped the attackers would spare him in exchange, but the revelation only angered the leader. The leader ordered his subordinates to search the entire bowling alley for survivors. No! If anyone remained alive when the next number appeared, the masked men would face punishment. During the break, the masked man found Tess, who had fallen behind, and the leader used a door breaker to force the door open. But when they entered, Tess had already slipped into the restroom through a divider. Not long after, the masked attackers followed her into the restroom. They checked each stall one by one and eventually turned to leave. Believing the danger had passed, Tess cautiously peeked out only for a masked attacker to suddenly appear right beside her. Meanwhile, Kennedy and Bruce had left the lounge, intending to rescue Tess. However, as soon as they stepped out, they were spotted by another masked man. In the chaos, Bruce tackled the attacker, but his age and weakness made him no match. The masked man pulled out a dagger and lunged at Bruce, but Kennedy grabbed a bowling ball and smashed it into the attacker's head, killing him. Just as Bruce got back on his feet, the masked attacker known as Doll Man appeared again, wielding a massive machete. Bruce thought he was doomed, but suddenly a gunshot rang out from a distance. Turning to look, Bruce saw the bowling alley's owner holding the gun. Hearing the gunfire, other masked attackers began to swarm the area. The owner ordered Bruce and Kennedy to escape while she stayed behind to hold them off. Tragically, she was quickly overpowered and hacked to pieces. Using the distraction, Bruce and Kennedy reached the maintenance exit, only to find it chained shut. Fortunately, Bruce had brought a pair of bolt cutters. Just as they cut through the chains and opened the door, they discovered more masked attackers waiting outside. In desperation, Bruce lit a signal flare, the sparks hitting the attackers.
I didn't realize Texans were there!
Just as he was about to make a run for it, more masked figures converged on them, forcing Bruce and Kennedy to retreat back inside. As soon as they returned, Kennedy heard Tessa's cries over the PA system. Determined to save her, Kennedy wanted to act, but the bowling alley was crawling with masked attackers. At that moment, Bruce thought of the uniforms. He and Kennedy returned to the equipment room and stripped two of the masked attackers of their clothing. Disguised as one of the masked men, Bruce approached the leader and reported that two survivors had escaped through the back door and that the police were on their way. Hearing this, the leader flew into a rage. He handed Bruce an axe and ordered him to kill Tess. Bruce looked down at Tess, his face filled with hesitation and inner conflict. Just as Bruce was about to act, Kennedy let out an involuntary cry, drawing the leader's attention. Realizing that Bruce and Kennedy had walked straight into his trap, the leader grinned with delight. He summoned all his subordinates, preparing to turn the two of them into minced meat. But as the three were surrounded, the masked men's watches suddenly began to beep again. The number 8 appeared, revealing a self-destruction command. One by one, the masked attackers collapsed to the ground, the leader froze in disbelief, staring at the scene in shock. Before he could react, Bruce grabbed a machete and charged, slicing the leader cleanly in two. And that wraps up 2024's latest horror film, Last Night at Terrace Lanes. Overall, the movie delivers non-stop carnage from start to finish, a relentless thrill ride of blood and violence. That's all for today's review. See you next time.